Greetings and welcome. I am Justavor, bringing you what I hope is constructive information on what the system of racism is and how it works, as well as what can be done to replace it with the system of justice. Primary tactics suspected racists use, according to the code. In this video, we will discuss some of the primary tactics used in the global system of white supremacy to maintain this system. Before moving forward, I am aware that many people, some viewers of this channel, may be unaware of the code and these concepts and theories surrounding the system of white supremacy. For those unfamiliar, I would suggest viewing previous videos such as Who is Justavor?, Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. on Color Me Poetry with Danny Queen, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing and her theory of color confrontation and racism, white supremacy. Is white supremacy really the problem? And how to end racism for the Vors. I have included links to these videos in the description. I would also like to emphasize the words of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing that reading is more important than watching television, and to inform viewers that the following tactics come directly from the code book in an abbreviated or condensed form. I encourage non-white people wanting to understand these tactics to read or reread the United Independent Compensatory Code System concept by Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. We recognize that words are important and that it is also appropriate to begin with the definition we use for the terms racism and white supremacy. We recognize racism and white supremacy to be synonyms and interchangeable, having the same definition, which is a global system of people who classify themselves as white and who are dedicated to the mistreatment and subjugation of all those they have classified as not white. From the efforts of attempted counter-racists to replace the global system of white supremacy with the system of justice, the overall conclusion is that those who practice racism are more easily able to maintain the system of white supremacy by keeping victims of racism confused about what the system is and how it works. A general observation with regard to power groups is that those in power do not tend to give up their power. Another conclusion drawn from attempted to counter the system of racism through various interactions with those who classify themselves as white is that those in power within the system of white supremacy are not going to voluntarily give up their power. The result has been that non-white people must do all we can in an effort to understand the system so that we can replace it with a system of justice. Justice meaning balance between people, guaranteeing that no person is mistreated and guaranteeing that the person who needs help the most gets the most constructive help. Since no person alive has ever experienced a system of justice, non-white people have no idea what a system of justice actually looks like. Nonetheless, it is up to non-white people to save the planet by producing a system of justice in any way we can. This means, first, replacing the system of white supremacy, racism. To do this, we must understand what the system is and how it works. Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., through his decades of observing interactions between those who classify themselves as white and those they have classified as not white, has written the United Independent Compensatory Code System concept, a compensatory counter-racist code, also referred to as the Code Book or simply the Code. The code was written as a textbook/workbook for thought, speech, and/or action for victims of racism, white supremacy, as a way to help victims understand what the system of racism is and how it works. Within the code book, Mr. Fuller has listed several tactics suspected racists use in their effort to maintain, expand, and refine the system of white supremacy. Mr. Fuller reminds us that the two basic methods of practicing racism, white supremacy are deceit, which can be defined as subtle or indirect violence. This is when racists say things that are false and when they influence non-white people to believe things that are not true in order to get victims to submit to and/or cooperate with the system of white supremacy. The other basic method of practicing racism, white supremacy is direct violence, which includes threats of violence. This is when racists, white supremacists, use or threaten to use, direct or indirect, bodily harm against non-white people who do not submit to and/or cooperate with the white supremacists in a satisfactory manner. Think of the interactions you have had with those who classify themselves as white, as well as interactions they have had with other non-white people, Which basic method of practicing racism do those interactions fall under? Maintaining the system of white supremacy requires that racists deceive their victims and keep them confused about what the system is and how it works. The code book lists 6 major racist strategies for causing confusion. These are racial classification confusion. This is when the white supremacists use classifications to determine who is and who is not to be considered white or non-white in order to determine who is to be mistreated. The code refers to racial classification confusion as one of the best ways for white supremacists to establish, maintain, expand, and/or refine racial confusion through illusion. To counter racial classification confusion, the code suggests to consistently use the terms white people, non-white people, and white supremacists as the racial classifications of the people of the known universe. Racial population dislocation confusion. Racial population dislocation confusion is the codified term used when the white supremacists keep victims of racism on the move from place to place. This usually happens while the white supremacists take unjust advantage of various calamities, disasters, and other hardships non-white people experience. The way to counter racial population dislocation confusion, as suggested by the code, includes being prepared in advance to move completely and swiftly with planned efficiency. Racial population tailoring confusion. Racial population tailoring confusion is the codified term used for when the white supremacists kill off large numbers of non-white people. This genocide is often done through drying out or poisoning water supplies, dumping poisonous waste, etc., with no intention to kill all non-white people, but to tailor the number of non-white people for better control and future domination. According to the code, the suggested way to counter racial population tailoring confusion is to do your best to get information about how you can best avoid every situation that is likely to involve you in killing people and/or being killed by people, as well as seeking to know and understand the different methods that racist man and racist woman use to kill non-white people in order to tailor non-white populations. Racial showcasing confusion. Racial showcasing confusion is a codified term used for when the white supremacists, racists, take large numbers of non-white people and put them out front. Allowing non-white people to possess and be associated with money and resources, places to live, accolades, and other comfortable and attractive things are deliberate and skillful ways of causing confusion in the minds of non-white people. When attempting to counter racial showcasing confusion, the code suggests no matter how many millions of non-white people who are chosen by the white supremacists to receive fame and fortune for racial showcasing, do not be tempted to blame any non-white person for any non-just harm that is done to anyone, white or non-white, as the dominant cause. Always blame the white supremacists. The code also says that if you are chosen to be racially showcased, always do your best to inform all non-white people that you are being racially showcased. Enjoy the material comforts that you receive, but also do your best to inform as many non-white people as you can of the fact that you will not be allowed to help them very much. This section on racial showcasing confusion is very in-depth, as are the other sections of the code book. I encourage you to read the code itself for a better understanding of the tactics mentioned. Racial sexual confusion. Racial sexual confusion is a codified term that refers to when the white supremacists are speaking and/or acting to best help dominate and mistreat non-white people by adding to, subtracting from, multiplying, and/or dividing the meanings of sex, non-sex, equal sex, lay sex, male, female, man, woman, gender, sexual deviation, etc. When attempting to counter racial sexual confusion, the code suggests that during the existence of white supremacy racism, do not engage in or help to promote any act of sexual intercourse and/or sexual play between any white person with any non-white person. The reason behind this is that when those who classify themselves as white engage in sexual intercourse, sex play, or so-called homosex or lesbianism with and or against non-white people during the existence of white supremacy, the greater result is always more chaos, conflict, and confusion among and between non-white people, and more power to the system of white supremacy. This section on racial sexual confusion is another very in-depth section within the codebook, as are the other sections of the codebook. I encourage you to read the code itself for a better understanding of the tactics mentioned. Racial white sacrifice confusion. Racial white sacrifice confusion is a codified term that applies when the white supremacist racists speak and or act to dominate and mistreat non-white people by doing great harm to themselves and or allowing others to do great harm to white people. The white supremacists sometimes do this in order to cause non-white people to believe that white supremacy does not exist, and or in order to cause non-white people to believe that racism is not a serious problem except for the few who have chosen to make it so. When attempting to counter racial white sacrifice confusion, the codebook suggests, among other suggestions, that non-white people not think, speak, or act as if you believe that the system of white supremacy, racism, has ended, because from time to time you see many white people in need of adequate shelter, food, medicine, money, etc. The code also suggests to be willing to give constructive help to those you are able to help, but at the same time, continue to work and learn to make yourself as self-sufficient as you possibly can. Continue to work and plan for your future constructive goals. The code advises being aware that white supremacists often present themselves as being helpless by deliberately placing themselves in situations where they will experience great harm, and that this tactic is ultimately utilized in order to improve the manner in which the system of white supremacy, racism, is maintained, expand, and or refined. What are your thoughts regarding these primary tactics white supremacists use in order to maintain the system of white supremacy, as well as the suggestions to counter these tactics? Feel free to leave your questions, comments, and concerns. If you would like an even better understanding of the code and how it works, please visit producejustice.com to order the United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept by Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. There are many constructive suggestions for ending the system of white supremacy, and Mr. Fuller's codebook and its word guide act as guides to getting and keeping on code. If you feel this content is constructive and worth your time and energy, please subscribe and share to support the making of more content in the future. Much appreciation to all the Vors already subscribed. I am Justavor, and I'm still learning. Thank you for watching. Until next time.
Let me say something that gets to the very crux of the matter, and this may be offensive for some to hear who are not on the side that we're on. White people, we have been the problem for 400 years.
Say that again.
Let me say it one more time for those of you who didn't hear me. White people, we have been the problem for 400 years.